a petition crowd in Beijing, which was the largest crowd since 1989 in the massacre there. And they just freaked out. They fantasized, they got paranoid that there must be a leadership here. They couldn't imagine that people would just, like a flash mob, what's said outside matters more to them than what's said inside. And that's why transnational repression has become so important for them. The point is that you could see them moving as a result of international pressure. If cosmetic doesn't work, I can see them ending forced organ harvesting.
What kind of a mindset of a society to normalize killing people for their organs?
It's incitement to hatred, it's incitement to genocide, it's propaganda.
Before we get started, please subscribe so that you never miss an episode of our cutting-edge contemporary conversations. Thank you. Welcome, David Maris. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much.
As I was researching about you and what an extensive background and what an honor and privilege to sit with you today to have this conversation. It is difficult to summarize the whole extent from your political journey to going to UN and then being an author. I would love you to narrate that story of Inquisition, inquiry, and then as a young man, how have you grown up to be the person you are?
I got involved in human rights and in general and dealing with mass atrocities in particular because from an early age I heard about the Holocaust. When I was 8, I found out about it, and even at that time, I wanted to do something about it. And my initial efforts in dealing with human rights as a lawyer were trying to bring Nazi war criminals in Canada to justice, but also generally internationally. And in fact, there was an effort here in Australia to the same effect. And I remember meeting with Australian prosecutors who were also involved in that issue. And I mean, that's an effort that still continues to this day, even though the perpetrators are pretty well all dead. Because I'm still involved in efforts to try to get the records, the prosecutors, the police, the courts about these trials. I'm still involved with the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. I'm part of the Canadian delegation to the meetings. In fact, I'm going to one in December in Jerusalem. And so I just basically have been through the years trying to deal with those issues, the mass atrocity issues, from different perspectives. My experience is, first of all, I'm Jewish, and I realized that but for the vagaries of war, neither I nor any Jewish person would be alive today, because the Nazis were not just killing Jews in Germany, they were killing Jews everywhere they went, and they were invading foreign countries for the specific purpose of killing Jews. And so, anyhow, I realized both the problem of mass atrocities and the danger of not trying to stop them, because if you don't stop them, they spread. And my vehicle, or I guess my way of doing that, is through the attempt to seek justice, and also advocacy, evidence, putting together a case about the problem, trying to show people what's happening. I mean, one of the problems you could see with the Holocaust, which is true of a lot of mass atrocities, is disbelief. At the time of the Holocaust, I mean, not just the Nazis or their supporters pretending it wasn't happening. You got people like Felix Frankfurter, a U.S. Supreme Court judge, Hannah Arendt, and Raymond Aron, Jewish intellectuals, saying couldn't believe it when they first heard the stories about it's happening. You had people who escaped from Auschwitz, Alfred Wetzler and Rudolf Verba, with plans of Auschwitz, going around telling people run away because they're going to come get you. Some people did, some people didn't believe it, and were killed. And and I actually even heard Rudolf Verba speak once in Winnipeg. The problem of disbelief, I would say, is common with mass atrocities. I mean, I see it now with the mass killing of Falun Gong for their organs, and other prisoners of conscience. the Uyghurs, Tibetan South Christians, because people are insular, they extrapolate. They think the rest of the world is like what they see around them, so there's certainly that phenomenon that has kept me going, and there's also, of course, I mean, the effort to get justice is not an easy one. I mean, partly because perpetrators seek immunity, but there's also there's a difference between law and justice.
That's the irony. Perpetrators are seeking immunity. That's very ironic of them to perpetrate an atrocity, and then you seek immunity of the wrongdoing.
Well, indeed. But more than that, there's a difference between law and justice, that the legal systems can often be distorted to be vehicles for impunity or immunity. And during the Nazi period, the legal system became a vehicle for oppression rather than a vehicle for justice, with maybe, I mean, there's one identified lawyer or judge who stood up against it in the whole system. So it's certainly enough to keep me busy. It has kept me busy. And another thing I found, I mean, the Holocaust is long over, although there's still the vestige of prosecution in getting the records. But as old atrocities recede, new ones arise. When I started off as an adult and dealing with human rights violations, I was dealing with apartheid in South Africa, with communist oppression in the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, the military dictatorships in Latin America, and they're all gone now. But there's violations that are occurring now which didn't exist at the time. I mean, the whole killing of prisoners of conscience in China for their organs, I mean, that didn't exist at the time. The technology of transplantation didn't even exist at the time. And so what you get is, when old violations recede, new ones pop up to take their place, and it's endless work.
Can I relate to, I was born in 1984. I'm a Sikh by faith, and I was born in early October in 1984. And end of October, there was a Sikh genocide in the capital of the country. I was born 250 k's away from the capital, where was 20,000 Sikhs, more than that, were killed in a matter of 2 days. The structure was people who were, they were not organized military people, but they were organized mob. They had the list of the electoral roll, and with Sikhs you can identify them from their last names.
Of course.
So all Sikhs, men is Singh and then women is Kaur. And they had the electoral list of people who live in which house. And they were going from house to house, pulling men out, putting tires across the body and burning them alive.
Right.
So I was born, I was a little child, almost 15, 20 days old when this was happening, just 250 k's from my house where I was living.
Right.
And I can very well understand the closeness, and many of my family members have gone through that atrocity. And I very much agree with the disbelief, that initial shock of the disbelief stories I've heard from family members and close cousins who have talked about, we can't believe we were living in harmony with our other faith brothers and sisters on the same street, and then they have just turned around and started killing us. The idea of disbelief is very much resounding in any other atrocity which people of my faith have faced.
Well, indeed, and I mean, the problems the Sikh community faces continue to this day. I mean, in Canada, there was an assassination of, I think, Nijjar Singh, simply because he was a Sikh activist, and I mean, one of the fact of human rights violations continues, but the form is constantly varying, and one of the problems of recognition is recognizing that variation. And one of the facets we're seeing now, which we didn't see so much in the past, is transnational repression. And so it used to be, that the repression occurred in the country where the totalitarian or repressive regime or the mobs or whatever existed. But now you get, partly as a result of modern technology, this repression occurring across borders, so that people in democratic countries, the diaspora and beyond, can be threatened by repressive regimes overseas. It's a phenomenon that we're only starting to recognize and deal with. There was a House of Lords inquiry in it that came out on July 30th this year. There's talk about having an inquiry in Australia, which I think would be very useful. While I've been here, I was part of a roundtable at the Parliament about that, and talked with some senators' offices about setting up a senatorial inquiry. So I think that this is a problem which comes from China, comes from India, comes from many different countries.
Can you also, before we go to specific atrocities, in your observation across and research across multiple mass atrocities and killing of a population because of their gender, creed, or race, what's the structure of a genocide? What's the structure of mass killing or mass atrocity? How does it happen? What's the pattern?
There is a scholar who's identified the steps of genocide. I think it's 10 or 12 steps. And basically, what you're starting with is incitement to hatred. And I think it's important to deal with that from the get-go. There's legislation about, there's international standards about incitement to hatred. There's legislation in some countries about it. But we're still working that through because, of course, often with human rights values, they don't all move in the same direction. Sometimes they conflict. And so, and you have to kind of balance off different human rights against each other. And so with incitement to hatred, there's a right to be free from incitement to hatred, but there's also a right to freedom of expression. So the question is, how do you balance off those two rights? I mean, the answer would be you try to avoid the greater harm, but and often the greater harm when it comes to balancing freedom of expression and incitement to hatred is indeed incitement to hatred, although not always. But I would say, and this is something, it's part of like one of the many books I've written on human rights is on that subject, Bloody Words, Hate and Free Speech, and this has become, again, because of technology, much more of an issue because with the internet, with social media, it's a lot easier to spread incitement to hatred than it used to be, and the system of social media is. The development of standards and implementation of the standards is little developed. So anyhow, I would say that in terms of the steps towards genocide, that's an important component.
Am I right in saying that one of the key things which is taken off, one of the key freedoms which is taken off in the steps towards a genocide is the freedom of speech?
One of the you're right to saying, well, freedom of speech itself remains a value. The question isn't
who gets to speak.
Well, the question is, like with freedom of speech, the question is whether it's persistent or episodic, whether it's intentional or unintentional. I mean, like with the incitement to genocide is obviously a very grave form of incitement to hatred. And when it comes to incitement to genocide, I would say, I mean, unless somebody is just misspeaking or maybe speaking privately, but incitement to genocide would almost always, I think, freedom from that sort of incitement matters more than freedom of speech.
In terms of the politics of genocide, because human rights, the definition of human rights or understanding of human rights is very different if you are on the binary spectrum of political right versus the binary spectrum of political left. How, in your observation, how have you seen the two definitions of human rights on either side, not supporting the core cause of, let's not create more issues for or challenges for people to live just a normal average life?
Well, I wouldn't say that human rights is different, left and right. I would say that left and right use human rights differently to assert their political agenda. I mean, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is universal, or well, global. It's accepted by every state, and people don't quarrel with the Universal Declaration. Some of them saying it's left, some of them saying it's right. I think what you have is, depending where you are in the political spectrum, you may prefer some rights rather than others, and even perpetrators, they don't reject the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I mean, they say they're respecting human rights, and they say that the critics are being unfair to them or violating their rights, and I think what you get in politics is a distortion of the vocabulary of human rights rather than an actual split within the human rights system.
And if we have to simplify, how does the left see for the political agenda the definition of human rights versus how does the right see the definition of human rights for their political?
Well, frankly, I think it would be up to the left and right to say that rather than me. Because,
but you have observed both of them, yeah.
But what I would say generally is, I believe in the value of discussion, debate. I mean, obviously not incitement to hatred, but you want to get to the truth about anything, including human rights. It's good to have a discussion and a debate about it, and you can't expect. I mean, human rights are universal, but you often get into issues, as I say, about balancing rights, about which is more important, and the way to get to a solution on any human rights, to get to the bottom of any human rights dispute, is to have a discussion, to have a debate, to have both sides, and I wouldn't say either left or right or wrong. I think we're better off with both left and right than neither.
And because human rights violation has happened and mass atrocities keep on occurring every few decades in a different country, but the structure sounds very similar, or the process is very similar. What are the preconditions before a mass atrocity is thought of? What are the preconditions? What are the situations which are happening in the ecosystem of that country, of that state, the judicial system, or the legal system, or the cultural economy of that country or a state? What are the preconditions to create that set of thoughts that yes, there is a pathway here to do mass atrocities?
Well, I will say, as I said before, there's incitement to hate and incitement to genocide. But another feature you can see in common with mass atrocities is the absence of democracy. There's a control of the state, control of the media, control of the dialogue, and so that when people in a democratic state where you see incitement to genocide, there's laws against it. There's a fair system of adjudication. There can be debates about it, and what you see in mass atrocities is a precondition, is a repressive form of control, a totalitarian form of control, so that the ability to stand up against the killers becomes limited or impossible.
And many of the atrocities, when there are two states going on each other in the history of the world, two countries or two states going on each other, killing each other people because of defined, either race, creed, or color. One state defines some people as terrorists, and the same state will define the same people who are fighting the war as nationalists or freedom fighters. So how is that language being understood from that? Because that would always create some form of people who are trying to fight against the mass atrocities.
Well, I think when it comes to language, you have to relate language to reality. Sure, perpetrators use the language of human rights. They don't say, we are embarked on a genocide. But they will. Perpetrators will use the language of human rights, but the touchstone for evaluation is the reality. And the fact that perpetrators are using the right vocabulary doesn't make what they're doing right.
But how how does the rest of the world call out that language? How does the rest of the world say,
Well, as I say, by facts. I'm a researcher, and as a lawyer, I'm used to going to court with evidence. So the question is, what is in reality happening? I mean, if innocents are being killed intentionally simply because of their ethnic identity, the notion that there's some justification for it disintegrates in the face of what's actually happening.
Could you take an example of a mass atrocity, and then if you can use that example to more elaborate on the whole structure of it?
Well, I mean, the Holocaust is a good example. The Nazis, first of all, there was a racist ideology then. They didn't accept the equality of humanity, and they said that Jews genetically were evil simply because they were Jewish. And they said there was the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is a Russian forgery, but it had an ideology that the Jews were trying to control the world, were planning to control the world, that actually did control the world behind closed doors, and that's, I guess you could say, an example of an ideology that generated a genocide, which was totally disconnected from the facts. I mean, the Jews obviously did not control the world, I mean, genetically, their makeup is the same as everybody else. I mean, the whole notion of race is it's an ideology, but it's not a reality. I mean, humanity is one species. So there's a disconnect between the Nazi ideology and the reality. The Nazi ideology justified in their own minds the Holocaust, but the facts certainly didn't.
And there is a religious persecution of people is happening across at this stage as we're talking in multiple countries. One of the case in point is Nigeria of Christians. What's your observation on that persecution? It's been happening for some time now. It has come to a lot of media attention more recently.
Well, there's what you see often is I mean, why do these ethnic divisions or religious divisions occur? I mean, it's hatred, certainly, but it's also power seeking, or it's either greed or power. And so what you get is people trying to mobilize or develop power through the development of an ideology of hatred. And I mean, that's true in Nigeria with the Christians, where you get some people who I would say distort the Islamic religion to go after the Christians. I mean, you can see it in China with communism. They go after Falun Gong as a power-seeking device for the communists. They create an enemy and then pretend that they have to deal with this enemy in order to justify their own hold on power. So that's definitely a dynamic that I see in a lot of situations.
I can understand in democracy, but in a communist setting where already the power is controlled by a group of people, and how can a religious minority be used to maintain power? How is that control works?
In a totalitarian system or in a communist system, there's no elections. So the people who are seeking power don't try to figure out what's popular, what's going to get them elected. What they're thinking about is what they're thinking about is not so much what's in the public interest as what's in the party interest. And the way they seek power and elevate themselves in the power system is they advocate for what they think they can persuade the others is in the best interest of the party. And what they're looking at in order to do that is people who are not members of the party as a potential threat. And what they saw with Falun Gong was a huge number of people, because Falun Gong is a spiritually based set of exercises, sort of like yoga, a Chinese equivalent to yoga. but they would do exercises. They would do them outdoors with exercise groups. The numbers were huge. Government estimates 70 million before the repression. Practitioner estimates 100 million. There were practice stations where people would do the exercise. In Beijing, there was 3,000 of them. So they were everywhere. So then there was this debate within the party. I mean, some people said they're harmless. The exercise is good for them and it's good for us because it cuts down on the cost of the health system. Other people were saying they're spiritual, we're atheists, we're modern. They're related to the ancient traditions. They may not be opposed to us, but they don't agree with us either. I mean, they believe in something else. I mean, okay, maybe 100 million is okay, but what about 200 million, 500 million, 800 million? At some point, if everybody believes in Falun Gong, nobody will believe in the party, and it becomes a threat. And so basically that voice went out.
The observation was there was a growth of number of a practice or a faith or a spiritual activity, and that increase in numbers was the threat to the people in power.
Well, indeed, there was a very specific dynamic because this party debate was going on for a long time.
How come? How does the research happen in this very critical and very? How has your travels been to observe all of this research and gathering evidence around it?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is public. I mean, you can just see it through the internet. Like in terms of the dynamics of repression, the way it started was that there was this debate within the party about what to do about Falun Gong. And then there was an actual publication in a newspaper in China, Tianjin, criticizing Falun Gong from the perspective of the people who said Falun Gong was a threat. So the party debate became public. Falun Gong demonstrated in front of this office of this paper, some practitioners, because they didn't like they thought, you know, the notion that Falun Gong was a threat was ridiculous. And so they demonstrate. The police come, arrest them. So then other practitioners protest the arrest. And the police say, go to Beijing to petition the arrest. We're not going to deal with it. So the practitioners it's not an organization, Falun Gong, I mean, but they have connections with each other through the cell phones. So they develop a petition crowd in Beijing, which was the largest crowd. This was in 99. This was the largest crowd that the party had seen in Tiananmen Square since 1989 in the massacre there. And they just freaked out. They said, where did these people come from? How come we didn't know about them? And they fantasized, they got paranoid that there must be a leadership here. They couldn't imagine that people would just like a flash mob with, I mean, they were technologically backward and they couldn't imagine this technology. So they show up and then, so Jiang Zemin, who was the Secretary General of the Communist Party, President of China at the time, he writes a memo to the Standing Committee of the Communist Party, which was leaked. So you can see the actual memo. And he says, we're atheists, they're spiritual, they're ancient, we're modern, there's a mastermind behind them. Who is it? Is it Western? I mean, you know, it's that sort of stuff. So, I mean, that's just one example, but you ask, how do I do the research? I mean, I can sit in Winnipeg and go on the internet and see an awful lot of stuff.
I've been nation states which are sovereign on their own, and then democratic nations to start with, when they are trying to, and then people who are normal voters, normal people, they go on streets to protest against either whether it's a anti-Semitism rally or a pro-Palestinian rally. How can nation states put an inquiry on or talk about human rights in different country or different legislation, different jurisdictions, sorry, and if they create, for example, if you create an inquiry on, you know, whether are we support pro-Palestine, are we pro-Israel, how does that impact for a nation state, which is independent then to those two countries which they are having war? How does that link or any inquiry on, for example, atrocities in China, here, will that change the behavior of the Communist Party?
Well,
And is there any past? Have you seen any evidence that nation states, which are independent of where the atrocities are happening, on their own they are speaking about human rights globally on a global stage? But how does that impact the Russia and Ukraine example? People were talking about things, and how do you see that pressure?
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, that question is country specific because the dynamics of each country is different. But I mentioned to you before, I mean, with China, you got this power struggles within the party, which basically revolve around the issue of not what's in the public interest, but what's in the party interest. What I'm dealing with specifically is the mass killing of prisoners of conscience, particularly Falun Gong, for their organs. And I've been on this file now for 19 years, and what I see is, I mean, the party is always reacting to this in a way with that focus in mind, what works for the party. And so, and within China itself, they can control. And in fact, as a result of that, what's said outside matters more to them than what's said inside, because inside they basically able to shut everything down, but they can't shut everything down outside. And that's why transnational repression has become so important for them. Ultimately, you can change the equation of what's good for the party by changing what's happening outside. I mean, if they get enough pushback outside, they will change because, I mean, ultimately, what the party's concerned about is not the killing of Falun Gong for their organs or the health or the cost of the health system. They're concerned about keeping the country under the control of the Communist Party, and they'll shift on almost anything where that shift works to the benefit of keeping the party in control of the country. So what I've seen, for instance, in terms of organ harvesting is, at one time, the Chinese government has had a shifting narrative on where the organs are coming from for organ sourcing. And they originally said it was donations, but they didn't have a donation system, so that was implausible. And so then they shifted to say everything was coming from prisoners sentenced to death and then executed who donated their organs to atone for their crimes before they were executed, which generated a tremendous pushback from the global transplantation profession, who said prisoner donations are not voluntary. And then the Chinese surgeons were not being allowed to go to a transplant conference in San Francisco in 2014. 35 of them were excluded, and then the foreigners weren't invited to a Chinese transplant conference in Hangzhou in 2014. So the Chinese changed the narrative back again in the end of 2014, saying starting 2015 only prisoners. Only donations, which was their original narrative. And by then they'd set up a donation system which generates tiny numbers. But the point is that you could see them moving as a result of international pressure. I mean, a lot of it is cosmetic, but it is movement. And and frankly, I mean, at some point, if cosmetic doesn't work, I could see them ending forced organ harvesting if basically the political cost to them from forced organ harvesting is more than the benefit they get from it.
What kind of a mindset of a society or a group of people to normalize killing people for their organs? What kind of narrative you have to push through so that normal people who know about that's happening, their own people, so that's normal. That's okay to.
Well, it's incitement to hatred. It's incitement to genocide. It's propaganda.
And how might you dehumanize a sect of people that you are saying that yes, we want to kill them for organ harvesting? How does that happen, and how does it become acceptable to a normal
Well,
public?
I mean, this is the problem of disbelief, that people can't see that happening even when it's happening because it's not part of their environment. But, it happens in one genocide after another. Like in the Holocaust, it wasn't just a few crazies. The Holocaust involved tens of thousands of killers, and it wasn't just Germans. I mean, it was everywhere the Nazis went. They had collaborators, people who were complicit in what they were doing. The locals rounded up the Jews because they knew who the Jews were. The Nazis didn't because they didn't know who the Jews were. And people just hatred is a basic human emotion. I mean,
Yeah, I understand.
and you can't. I mean, we're frankly a very self-destructive species, and I think that's a facet of humanity we have to recognize.
And picking up from hatred as in the history of all atrocities and genocides, are there any other examples of we are killing a group of people to harvest their organs or body parts or
Well,
for trade?
transplant technology developed after World War II. The Nazis didn't do it because the technology didn't exist. So, there is, there is other countries where there's transplant abuse. It's not just China. What's unique about China is it's institutionalized, it's government sponsored, it's systematic, it's throughout the whole country. Other places you get a black market where the government doesn't do it, but they may not prosecute people very assiduously, or there may be instances. I mean, it's a criminal activity which isn't really properly combated. But what we see in China is new, and I mean, frankly, that's often the case with mass atrocities, which makes them difficult to deal with. I mean, the fact of mass atrocities continues, but the form of mass atrocities changes. Partly with the development of technology and partly what's available. I mean, with Rwanda, the genocide occurred through axes. People were just being hacked to death. And before the genocide, they were importing axes from all around the world, including a lot from China. And I mean, as bad as China is, I'm confident they didn't realize at the time they were sending all these axes to Rwanda was for the purpose of Hutus killing Tutsis or the Interamwe killing Tutsis. The form of genocide constantly evolves and constantly surprises.
And what is the mindset of a person who's leading the whole conversation of having a narrative or dehumanizing the one sect or one group? Are the leaders or there's a leader? How does that mindset or thought process created? Yes, there is a narrative of hatred. I want to hate that group, but who's the architect? Are they architects or an architect, typically?
Sure. I mean, with communism, there was Mao Zedong. With Nazism, there was Adolf Hitler. But, in isolation, if you put them in a room by themselves, they just seem kind of strange. I mean, what makes them powerful is the resonance they get from the vocabulary that they use. That they're carrying a message for which there's receptivity. And so I think it's a mistake to say, I mean, because I was involved in the Nazi war, criminals' effort to bring them to justice. I mean, it was very common for the perpetrators to say, just following orders, Hitler's the only one responsible. But no, I mean, the individual who do it are responsible. It's the people who accept that, believe that, act on it. They're the problems. I mean, without the followers, Mao Zedong would have been nothing. Adolf Hitler would have been nothing. You can't just blame it on them.
On the global stage, when people come together from part of at the UN or any other global stage of human rights, nation states who they have some nation states will talk very high moral ground on telling other peoples how to behave better, telling other nations how to follow through on their human rights commitments. But whereas when you see their backyard, they are doing something. So there is a hypocrisy of human rights of many nation states when they are in public fora or public stages. What's your observation on those things?
Well, first of all, I don't think you have to expect perfection to expect that from human rights advocacy. I think that it's inevitable that there's going to be some problems in any country. And indeed, I think human rights advocacy abroad, which may bring charges of hypocrisy, can help to improve human rights in the country of advocacy. But I would also say, there is a distinction between democratic countries and non-democratic countries in the sense that in democratic countries, there can be an internal debate and criticism about human rights violations by their governments or by non-governmental people where the governments aren't doing anything. Whereas in non-democratic states, there isn't that debate. In non-democratic states, the only criticism you're going to get is criticism from outside. So I think realistically, if you're going to have an impact on human rights in non-democratic countries, the criticism has to come from outside because that's the only place from which it can come.
And almost always the tools used is commerce to control an ethical behavior through commerce of a country, the other nation states. So do you think, has that tool worked very well in the most recent atrocities to control that, okay, that nation state is doing an atrocity and let's control the commerce to that country, or let's have some sanctions to that country? Has that worked, and how efficient those tools are?
Well, I guess there's, I would say generally with human rights advocacy, it helps. Asking whether it works is kind of, it depends, works for whom. I would say when you're dealing with human rights violations, you've got basically three audiences: the victims, the perpetrators, the public. It works for the victims always because it recognizes their victimization. It shows that we're concerned with that. It means they're not alone. And so, yes, I would say it always works for the victims. For the perpetrators, I mean, they're going to ignore it. They will say there's nothing wrong with us. You're doing something wrong by sanctioning us. I personally have been sanctioned by China officially, public announcement. The reason they sanctioned me was that the Canadian government had sanctioned some of the perpetrators for persecution of Falun Gong, Uyghurs, and Tibetans, and so the Chinese reacted not by sanctioning government officials, but by sanctioning NGO people like myself, saying we were responsible for giving them false information. So, I mean, obviously, it mattered to them, or they wouldn't have done that. So it's had some impact. But it wasn't one of, we're going to change our behavior. It was kind of ridiculous. But I would say also sanctions do have a public opinion impact because they help to identify perpetrators. It's kind of a record of what's going on. It changes the public discourse. So I would say sanctions are useful, but I think you have to look at who they're useful for and what they do.
Can wars or wars initiated by nation states on commercial reasons can be defined, or do they sit under mass atrocities, can be seen as genocides, the act of wars or war? Well,
obviously not every war is a genocide. I mean, there's rules of war, and if you comply with the rules of war, you're not committing genocide. There are some genocides which occur in the course of war, but they are a violation of the laws of war.
But isn't a war, in a way, in principle, yes, there's a rule of war. Yes, the difference between law and justice. Yes, there are rules of war, but in the end, there are people dying on both sides. So is that not a genocide?
People dying on both sides, but if they're armed combatants, it's not a genocide.
They are people with families, sons, daughters, parents.
Well, that's true, but I mean, a war is tragic. It's regrettable. I mean, I'm against all wars, but except self-defense. But if somebody attacks, I don't think you could say people should not defend themselves.
No, agree with that.
Yeah.
Agree with that. Yeah. But then I was just, is war also another form of genocide? Is that I was
Well, I would
wondering.
say, in principle, no. I mean, there's the Geneva Conventions on the laws of war, and as long as you're, and if somebody attacks me and in self-defense, I kill the attacker.
Yeah.
It's not a form of genocide.
But the attacker in that situation is a perpetrator, and then the recipient of the attack is the victim.
Sure, but an attacker in under the laws of war would be committing a war crime.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a war crime obviously is wrong.
Yeah.
But it's different from genocide.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting to understand the difference between war and genocide. But I think killing of human life is of some way or form, whether in any preconditions, should sit under killing of humans.
Well, sure. I mean, just in
because as you said, in the end, genetically Jews were not different than anybody else.
Right.
They are all are humans.
Right.
Human lives lost is human lives lost.
Well, indeed. But I mean, there's murder, which is a crime.
You're
but
right.
not every murder is a genocide.
You're right. You're right. Yeah, at scale.
Well, I mean, you do get, unfortunately in the U.S., because there's no effective gun control, you get mass killings almost every day. People will just, and a lot of them are mentally ill, and they'll just shoot into a crowd without any real explanation, rational explanation. It's obviously a crime, but it's not necessarily genocide. It just could be a form of mental illness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How has the global dialogue on human rights matured? Have people across, whether mostly democratic nations or nation states, how aligned they are on the conversation? How where do you see where the power struggle at the global level sits?
Well, again, that's more, it's difficult to answer in a general sort of way, but I would say in terms of China and killing of Falun Gong for their organs, what I see is a variety of approaches. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's now a treaty, Council of Europe Treaty Against Trafficking in Human Organs, mm-hmm. But only 15 ratifying states out of a potential of 192.
Yeah.
There's been a recommendation in Australia, the Parliament, that Australia sign and ratify it, and they haven't said no, but they mm-hmm. haven't done it either. And I would say it's difficult to answer that question in a general sort of way. I think it depends on the specific country you're dealing with, the specific country that's dealing with them, what the specific human rights issue is. And I would say also, of course, what we're seeing is, as I said before, continually evolving forms of human rights violations, mm-hmm. so that partly the result of continually evolving technology, and so that we're always dealing with new phenomena like this transnational repression is something mm-hmm. that really wasn't happening in the past. Even transplantation didn't exist during World War II, and we're dealing with it now. And mm-hmm. so I would say that, and as geopolitics changes, the attitude of human rights changes too, because China wasn't in the past as big as a political and economic player mm-hmm. as it is now, mm-hmm. and that impacts on the relationships people have with China and how they react to it. My general view of human rights is, to a certain extent, we're always playing catch-up, because the technology evolves, the abuses evolve, mm-hmm. and the people who set in place the systems that are being abused didn't imagine the abuses at the time they set them in place. I mean, I'm confident that the people who developed transplant technology didn't develop transplant technology mm-hmm. to kill political prisoners, mm-hmm. And probably never imagined it would be used for that purpose, but it is. So now we have to deal with it, and there's this constant evolutionary problem.
And as you're advocating for an inquiry from Australia, and as you know, Australia and China has a very strong commercial trade relationship. How does that, precondition or sit into the inquiry being pushed through, or how does that politics work between the trade and human rights?
Well, I think when it comes to mentioning China and its human rights violations, that can cause within Australia or any country that has strong relationships, economic relationships with China, it can cause a problem. But there's also, what I would say is when you're dealing with human rights at a structural level, you don't need to mention any particular country. Like China, Australia doesn't have to mention China to enact legislation to prohibit complicity in cross-border transplant abuse, or impose mandatory reporting for transplant tourism, or to deny health insurance benefits to people who engage in transplant abuse abroad, and so on, or immigration controls. There's a whole set of systems that doesn't have to mention a country, but obviously there are some states in the United States, I think, that have legislation that says you can't get health insurance if you go to China for a transplant. Probably Australia wouldn't do that because it specifically mentions China. But Australia could easily say you can't get health insurance if you get like this is what Israel did. They didn't mention China. They said you can't get health insurance if you get a transplant in a country that doesn't have laws like ours. That you see, because once you don't mention China, the Chinese official political attitude is this doesn't apply to us. We're innocent. We don't do anything wrong, so the law doesn't affect us. Even though practically it does. Their facade is they don't want to seem to care because it would be self-implicating.
Yeah. In my circles of lawyer friends and people who are, and I talk to a lot of young 2-3 years of experienced lawyers, and many people want to have that aspiration of being a human rights lawyer. In your extensive experience, in your journey, and I know you've done a fair amount of research on that as well, what would you suggest an upcoming human rights lawyer who are starry-eyed in terms of if they want to work into the human rights space? Where should they focus on? Which countries and which areas should they focus on?
Well, as I say, nobody's perfect, so they
start from home.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but what I would say, because home is fine, but in Australia, there's lots of people dealing with the issue. And similarly in Canada, I'm not very involved in human rights issues in Canada because I don't need to be. There's lots of other people doing it. I would say focus on countries where the insiders can't do it, because if they do it, they become human rights victims themselves. And the only people who can do it are outsiders. So that would be my suggestion. So that would be China, Russia, Iran, the countries that really go after people inside their own country if they criticize the government. So it has to be outsiders.
Thank you, David, for your time today, and thank you for answering these questions very candidly. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.